Welcome to the Geekcentric podcast, and welcome to our spoiler-free review for Transformers 1. It's time to show them we're more than meets the eye. Welcome, Autobots and Decepticons, to the Geekcentric podcast. My name is Nate, and this is our spoiler-free review for Transformers 1. Special thanks, as always, to our friends at Paramount Pictures Canada for inviting us to watch this movie early for review. If you're joining us for the first time, we are Geekcentric, a podcast focusing on the world of movies, TV shows, games, and all things Geekcentric. Joining me for today's review, we have my fellow Cybertronian, who's always filled with energon. He's Justin the Jazz-lovin' Laurence.
I do love jazz. That's a very good description.
The Autobot or the music?
The music. The
Okay.
Autobot is yeah, he's all right. Okay. He's got himself into some situations, but
Yeah.
he's definitely not as jazzy as you would want, right? You know, a little more jazz hands.
That would be awesome if they did more of like a jazz spin on jazz.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, like he was like, kind of like snappy and like had jazz hands.
If that was the origin for his character, was that he's just like really into jazz, that would have been...
That'd be dope.
That'd be dope.
Better than any of the things that Michael Bay did with his robots, making them learning the vocabulary of street slang and
giving them balls
and making them like sort of black parody characters.
Oh,
come
gosh. But I mean, speaking of Michael Bay and Transformers, we're talking about Transformers 1, the latest in the Transformers IP. For yourself, what's your history with Transformers? Where did you get into Transformers, and what's your experience with Transformers been like?
Well, yeah, growing up, I definitely watched Transformers, but not religiously. I think I was a little too young, and I think I was into more Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, and that sort of stuff. Transformers was around, G.I. Joe was also around, but I think they were a bit before me. But my cousins, again, I always attribute everything that I'm interested in to my cousins who were older than me, who exposed me to a lot of these things. And yeah, that's how I kind of got into it. But it really was the films, the Michael Bay live action movies that I really clung to. They're not my origin, but I was appreciative of this idea of transitioning these animated characters into live action, and that was really interesting. I was going to film school at the time, and I was doing a lot more like analytical study on movies, and I was doing a lot of studying on Michael Bay's work and understanding his sort of complexities of around him as a filmmaker. So that with the first Transformers movie, it definitely served as sort of a conduit for me to get really into it. But that said, I will say the subsequent movies after the first Transformers movie were all hot garbage. Outside of Bumblebee, they just again, we'll talk about this movie in relation to those, but I use this word a lot. Michael Bay is a spectacle first person. He doesn't necessarily worry himself too much about character focused stories. He thinks that, and he gets some great performances from some people, from some of his actors. So I don't doubt that he's not a fantastic director. It's just when he's editing, he's putting the spectacle before that character first stuff in a lot of ways. And I feel, and I think, you see it in those Transformers movies. You see it in the idea that there's just it's nonsensical how things kind of play out. But yeah, I think that's sort of my history with it. I was very surprised and extremely delighted by this movie, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, I know. I'm stoked to talk about this movie as well. I think for me, like yourself, like I knew of Transformers when I was younger. I was never like a kid that was like into cars. Like I never had Hot Wheels or anything. I really
the toys
though, are
for sure
where it was at for me. And I think I was also really into dinosaurs when I was a kid.
Yes.
And so Beast Wars, or Beasties as it was called in Canada, is what drew me in the most. And like the moment I saw, freaking Megatron as the leader of the Predacons as a freaking T-Rex, I was
Yeah.
just like,
And then
okay, you got
Raptor.
me. You
And then you
got
got Raptor, who he
and
was dope too.
Rhinox and Cheetor
Yeah.
and all of them. And
Yeah, I forgot about that too. That definitely played a part in kind of continuing that legacy. The toys, man, that Optimus Prime and that Megatron were huge. They were
yeah,
massive toys.
yeah. And then yeah, like yourself, like Michael Bay, I think the first movie, the second movie I kind of watched. I think I fell off after that, and then Bumblebee was just so
So good.
wonderful. But I'm excited to talk about this movie, and I think the more that I think about this movie, the more it's reinvigorating Transformers overall for me, which I think is maybe one of their goals of putting this movie out. But
Yes, I
let's get
think
to
so.
our review. I'm going to start with the synopsis for this film. Transformers 1 is the untold origin of Optimus Prime and Megatron, better known as sworn enemies, but once were friends bonded like brothers who changed the fate of Cybertron forever. In the first ever fully CG animated Transformers movie, Transformers 1 features a star studded cast including Chris Hemsworth, Brian Tyree Henry, Scarlett Johansson, Keegan-Michael Key, Steve Buscemi, with Laurence Fishburne and Jon Hamm. The movie is directed by Josh Cooley and premieres in theaters on September 20th. Which is tomorrow, if you're listening to this as of the time that we put out this review. So you can listen to this, get hyped, and then go check out the movie. I wanted to kind of start off, Justin, and jump into the look and feel of this movie. You know, as I said in that synopsis, this is the first ever fully CG animated Transformers movie. You know, we've had shows in the past that were fully CG, and of course, we've had the original animated series. But this being our first fully CG animated Transformers movie, how did the look and feel work for you in this movie?
I think again, it's an animated movie. I don't think it does anything massively bold or outside of itself that's super different in a capacity that's like a Into the Spider Verse
Sure.
or
Or even a Mutant Mayhem.
Mutant Mayhem, or even later this month, Wild Robot looks entirely very stylistically driven. I think
Hmm.
this maintains a tradition, a traditional look to the Transformers in that it's not really trying to reinvent itself. It's
Hmm.
keeping it actually very very focused, and I think that doesn't go without saying that the animation is top tier. Again, there's no lacking. It's just there's nothing that in terms of it's not trying to push boundaries with it. But I think what it does do really well with this CGI first is it's showcasing what can be achieved beyond the limitations of live action.
Hmm.
There's a sort of cold and mechanical look to the world of Cybertron, but then there's also moments where it's brought to life with stunning detail that feels strangely organic at times, and I think that adds depth and context to this environment, to this world that I think we haven't really fully seen
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, and maybe we have in the comics and other things. Don't come at me, I haven't read any of the comics. I'm really going off of what I do know, and the sort of iconography of what Cybertron is. So I think the visual design of this film liberates Cybertron, Autobots, and Decepticons from any preconceived notions, and it's offering something fresh yet still familiar to the iconic appearances of Megatron and Optimus. Like, they look like their staple selves, just younger, if you will. So I think that the blending of that sort of mechanical look, the subtle organic touches, really does create in a lot of ways an immersive and very fresh and bold take on what would be Cybertron and the world itself in the Transformers universe.
Well, I mean, you know, you mentioned the comic books. I would be shocked to see if there was a comic book that talks about the day jobs of these bots in Cybertron, right? And that's kind of where we're getting into in terms of the sort of vibe that you're getting into at the beginning of this movie and throughout the movie. And you know, I think as huge geeks, we often like to understand the structure and the rules of a fictional sci-fi world, and then we enjoy these stories when they play within those rules. And then oftentimes you'll see on the internet, we will all freak out when they go outside of those rules, when they break those rules. I think, to be fair, there are times where that can take you out. And I caught myself at the beginning of this movie, going into this movie, doing that, asking questions like, why are there cars and tanks when they don't know, when they've never been to Earth or interacted with humans? Why do they know what animals are? Why doesn't Optimus, or Orion Pax, as he's called in this movie, why can't we hear his footsteps when he's a giant metal robot? But I will tell you, when we're talking about the feel and the vibe of this movie, the moment they cracked the first joke in this movie, all of those feelings quickly melted away. And I was just instantly brought to this place of, I'm having so much fun right now. I don't really care. And that Saturday morning cartoon nostalgic rush started to just sort of flood my brain in terms of the animation. It actually reminded me a lot of the original Beasties, especially the way their faces are animated, and they kind of have like these like moving, like, it almost looks like their faces are soft and like pliable, and they have lips. So it kind of reminded me a little bit of that. It might reminded me a little bit of Reboot, but with the polish of modern animation, with the polish of something like a Star Wars, the Clone Wars, or the Bad Batch, but on a even higher, bigger
Yeah.
movie budget.
Yeah, I don't think that this is a film that's trying to push the boundaries of animation. It's just trying to bring as much life to a world that I think that hasn't, again, been fully explored, and that hasn't been, fully fleshed out. And I think that with the animation and the way that they've built the world and they've built the characters, to your point, they're getting somewhere that feels familiar, yet hyper elevated in that, it's embracing the modern technology.
And I want to kind of, when we're talking about the animation and the movement of these characters, I think is also a huge highlight, a huge
Yeah.
thing that we both recognized and we're just loving the entire time. And I remember, I'm bringing up Beasties a lot, but I remember when that trailer for the Beast Wars movie came out, and I'm ashamed to say,
Uh-oh.
I still haven't seen it because I just don't want to get hurt. But I remember talking about that trailer on the podcast, and how seeing Cheetor do that mid-air flip transformation, and just how damn cool that looked. And we get that over and over and over again in this movie. There's so many fantastic action moments, the way they transform, or even like they'll do like half transformations to pull off like a sick finishing move. Like I couldn't count the amount of times, Justin, that you and I were just both audibly like,
Mhm.
oh, here we go. Like we were just having such a good time.
Well, I think, again, with the movement and the motion, it really plays in part with what animation allows them to do, right? Like they don't have to worry about, what's plausible, what makes sense. It's really about just doing it and having fun, and the way the camera can position itself. Like, of course, we can see this in, a pseudo live action that would probably be 90 to 95% CGI, with, humans as a means
And
to
probably cost
identify.
significantly more.
For sure, because
Yeah.
of what they would probably need to do from a mocap standpoint.
Right.
And who knows how that plays into this. And, we're not that big of experts that we understand budgetary, how it's allocated. But that said, it feels, when you watch this movie and you watch the action sequences, that the animation, very much like, Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, and, Across the Spider-Verse, there's just such a freedom to explore how these characters move and how the action moves in these animated worlds, that don't feel like they could really explore that in live action.
Yeah.
Right, so that's fully embraced in this movie. And the point of your making, like how they transform, or if they're half transforming, and how transforming is even, perceived in this movie as sort of a rite of passage, and, this thing that they need to kind of earn, if you will. But that said, it's sort of, you see it in all avenues of how they're really telling this story from a visual perspective, that they are free. Like, they're embracing the freedom that animation is giving them. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what's really great.
Yeah, and it adds so much to their ability to craft this story. I wanted to mention the music, because coming out of this movie, I was saying to you, how I felt a little let down by Brian Tyler's lack of bringing back the original Transformers Robots in Disguise like theme, which
I don't
was
think they own the
originally
rights
done.
to do that, though.
Well,
I don't know.
so I was looking into it, and that might be part of it. Anne Bryant and Ford Kinder did the original music. I will say, I think Brian did such an incredible job with the Koji Kondo library of music for the Super Mario Bros. Movie last year that I think that was where my expectations were set, that we were going to kind of get this very wide net of sort of musical elements, whether it be, some of the stuff from the Michael Bay movie or even Linkin Park to a certain degree, or what have you, just the things that, and that original song. However, I did do a little bit more research into this, and I did learn that Brian Tyler composed the score for a series that was Transformers in 2010 called Transformers Prime. And I think that's pretty cool, because that actually, when you listen to that theme, it does show up, or you do hear it rather, in this movie pretty prominently. Actually, I went back and listened to some of the songs from the movie, and it's sort of sprinkled throughout. And I think that to me just sort of shows me that, hey, you know what? There's 14 and 15-year-olds out there that are going to pop for that the way that I would have popped for something that would have alluded to maybe one of the Michael Bay films or the earlier Transformers projects, right? Like, so it's one of those things where I still feel as though there was a missed opportunity to sort of cast an even wider net. But I will say, because he worked on an original fully CG animated Transformers project in the past, I do think that's kind of a bit of homage that he was sort of paying to in his composition to that original series.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't even know that he had done that.
Yeah.
But Brian Tyler has done a wide range of stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
the fact that he probably had the keys to the kingdom, if you will, for
The
Mario.
Mushroom Kingdom.
Yeah, for the Mushroom Kingdom for Mario, like of course you're going to use that iconic music because it's so signature. I do think that the reason why we haven't heard that theme, the Transformers theme, in this and in the past Michael Bay movies, might be has probably something to do with who owns the rights and how they can use it. And that's probably it. But that said, Steve, I believe his name is Steve Jablonsky.
Mhm.
He did the score for the original Michael Bay films, and that's some of my favorite tracks, right? Like I think the music in Transformers 1 draws clear inspiration from those original live action films, and it feels heroic and cinematic, and it elevates the characters beyond just the simple catchy theme song of the Transformers,
Mhm.
right? I think Brian Tyler's original score, it captures the essence of these figures being iconic, creating something that feels both epic yet retaining a sense of incompleteness, and reflecting the early stages of Optimus and Megatron and their journey. This felt very reminiscent to, like, Hans Zimmer's score for Batman Begins. He talked about how he didn't want to complete the hero's score in that first film because he hasn't become a hero. So there was a lot of singular notes and sort of soft sort of beats to kind of tell the story of Batman in the first stage. And I think, Tyler's music serves as sort of an emotional thematic commentary that on the origins of these characters, building anticipation for the legends that they would become. And it feels very familiar to I think the again, the original the original live action films, in that it does have that heroic cinematic elevation to its score. But I will say that it was probably not necessarily as pumped up as I've heard in other Brian Tyler films. Like he's done most of the Fast and Furious films, if I'm not mistaken,
Right.
and like the music is pretty jacked, especially even the scores, because he's not doing the mixed compositions. He's doing like actual movie score stuff. So he's very talented. It's really cool that you found out that tidbit, that he had previously worked on another project. It might make more sense as to why he took this on, and maybe the approach that he's having with kind of not necessarily pushing it too hard, because the idea is that they haven't yet become the characters that we know and love. And
Right. They
that
haven't
feud hasn't
earned
haven't earned it.
that music yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I
Yeah.
mean, I look forward to maybe a future installment where we do finally get to sort of
Yeah.
get those elements. But yeah, really, really cool stuff. Let's get into some other things we hear and see, and that would have to do a lot with the performances from this phenomenal cast: Chris Hemsworth, Tyree Henry, Scarlett Johansson, Keegan. I keep saying Keegan-Michael Key.
You like a Kegel, eh? You've been doing too many Kegels.
I'm wondering if he's ever gotten that, but I'm sure he has.
Kegel, how are you?
Keegan-Michael Key and Jon Hamm. Why don't we sort of start off with Chris Hemsworth and Tyree Henry, because they really are the sort of the heart of this movie. And it's their friendship is kind of the focus, right? So what did you think of their performances in this film?
Well, I think Chris Hemsworth delivers a standout performance, in my opinion. I think he's balancing both the bold heroism with moments of levity and sincerity. I think making this character feel both larger than life, but also deeply relatable. I think that's what he achieves, and I think the same can be said very much about Tyree Henry. I think the two complement each other, and they were both on that trajectory of being very sincere, very honest in their performance, and adding that levity, adding that sense of humor, adding those moments of heart that really do hit. I honestly, I think that they're such a standout stars in this, and it brings such a grounded intensity and emotional complexity to their roles. I think both actors give very genuine performances that feel refreshingly distinct from the original voice of Peter Cullen and Frank Welker. However, and you and I were talking about this, so it is very true. As the story progresses, you can start to hear
You hear
Hemsworth
it. Yeah.
and Henry naturally evolve their interpretations, subtly echoing the signatures of Cullen and Welker, while still making the characters their own. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's a gradual shift, that mirrors the character's growth, and it beautifully sets the stage for this iconic rivalry that we know we're gonna get eventually.
Well, I mean, I think for Chris, it was interesting because, like, the first thing I thought was, I'm glad it's not Chris Pratt again. Like, I don't like, I liked him as Mario. I don't get me wrong.
Yeah, he's perfect. Yeah,
I just don't need him as Mario, Garfield, and Optimus Prime. Like, leave parts of my childhood to other people, please. But yeah, I quickly went from hearing Thor, like instantly I heard Thor at first, and then very quickly he becomes Orion Pax, which is really, really cool. And then he starts to, like you said, he sounds more and more like a leader as this movie goes on, and I enjoyed him so much. And I think Tyree Henry as D16, it's cool, like you say, like we get to see them both growing, and obviously it's not a spoiler to sort of emphasize that they grow in opposite sort of directions, but they both find sort of the things they need to get to that place of being leaders in their own right. And yes, they very much do start to shift into their character personas as they start to sort of move a little further and further apart throughout the movie, and they find the hero, they find the villain, and the leaders in both of them in different ways. I also want to talk about Scarlett Johansson as Alita 1. She's kind of the bad cop, if you will, in this sort of
Right.
4-person buddy cop adventure, but she does bring a little bit of a sense of maturity to this group, which I think is much needed for the other 3 in the party. I love Scarlett Johansson in pretty much everything she does. The only thing I will say is I just don't know if I got enough of her in this movie. Like, I like her. I like her character a lot. I thought she had some fantastic moments to shine throughout the action, but from a dialogue standpoint, from a writing standpoint, and not from what she delivered, but just I just wanted more of her, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I understand. They used her in a way, like, I thought her voice performance as Alita 1 was solid, though it's not a standout like the others.
Sure.
Even Keegan-Michael Key, like, I think he was a standout as well.
Mm-hmm.
But she served her purpose well. I think she acts as both as you said, a bad cop with maturity that challenges Optimus, um, and also challenges Optimus of who he is, and also makes him understand who he can become. I think
Hmm.
like that's her purpose, and she really does drive that home. She has some great action sequences.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, but I think her character's meant to add a little bit more perspective for the group as well as for Optimus, and to kind of push him to kind of push Optimus to confront the values and the role of being a leader.
Hmm.
I think that her presence is it's not show stealing by any means, but it effectively helps grow Optimus on his personal journey, and also the other characters around. Like you said, like she's kind of like the big sister in the group, and she adds a sense of maturity, take charge. I think she surprises them a lot of the times, and I think the character itself can be explored in future stories, but
Hmm.
here she served her purpose. I was actually surprised to hear her voice. At first I thought it was Aquafina,
Oh, okay.
and then I was like, no wait, and then she started talking more, and I think it's awesome that obviously Scarlett Johansson and Chris Hemsworth have great years of experience working together as Thor and Black Widow. So you can hear in the dialogue that comfortability,
Yeah.
that sense of like friendship and bond that exists, and I think that really stems from their real relationship with one another.
Yeah.
Keegan Michael, can we talk about him? I
Let's
think
talk about
he
Kegel.
yeah, let's he
Keegan
delivers
Michael
he
Key.
yeah, he delivers a very unexpected, well, I guess expected, hilarious take on Bumblebee, just given the fact of who he is.
Hmm.
I think he portraying him as the chattiest version of the character we've ever seen is hilarious. At first, as we're listening to him talk, I was really wishing he would lose his vocal box sooner. But it definitely grew on me, and I think I love the choice of making him like an over talker who just doesn't shut up. I think, and to have Keegan be that character, and still add heart, still add some emotion to match the level of voice performance from his counterparts. He really does bring it, and I think, yeah, like it's a really interesting approach on bringing that out. And there's one moment really that I just wanted to call out. There's a standout scene where the team embarks on a journey, and instead of relying on like music or like a montage to show their bonding, you just hear B talking the entire time. And they just
Yeah.
fade from different aspects. And it just
It's showing you
emphasizes
time
just how much he
passing.
can't
It's
shut up. Yeah, because he can't
yeah.
shut up. So like it was really interesting. Like you kind of like it felt like one of those moments where it's like, oh, we're gonna just throw some music and we'll show some scenic stuff as they journey to their destination. But no, they just had Keegan talking and like asking questions and talking to himself, and it's just a clear subversion that adds humor to and character depth, making B, you know when he inevitably loses his voice, more impactful, and I'm maybe more appreciative of why he lost his voice.
For
So I
sure.
don't know.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think I loved that moment in the movie, and I loved how we were at a fan, like a family fan screening, and there were some press there as well as us. But that moment, and the audience just starts sort of the laughter building and building and building. But I think to that point with Keegan is I loved that he was kind of every audience member who excitedly played with Transformers as a kid. That's his
Yeah.
persona in this movie.
Yeah.
And so B is so happy. Anything and everything that he gets to do in this movie, he's just so excited about it. And I think Keegan killed it with his delivery. And I think it is to be expected from his, comedic timing and
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
charm. And I think he delivered the most laughs, both for younger audiences, but also if you're fans of deeper cut Keegan-Michael Key references. There is a moment in this that will have you cackling. I was freaking out about it. I was so happy with a specific name drop that you'll hear. But I think this was a fantastic fit for him, and I really think he emphasizes the most. I think this whole movie does, but I think he emphasizes the most why we don't necessarily need humans in a Transformers story. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Haley Steinfeld in Bumblebee,
Yeah.
but I think B reacts to everything. The way he reacts to everything in this movie fills that role
Yeah.
so wonderfully, and I
Mhm.
think it's the same for the other bots on this cast. But I just think he was like the most human, and I thought that was great.
Absolutely. He added that humanity, that sort of that relatability is among all of these characters. I think that's the one thing that's really interesting about them is, as you said, like there isn't a narrative need to have humans involved
Hmm.
in this story. This film effectively proves if you can make these characters relatable, then there's just they are the human touch,
Yeah.
right? It's about seeing ourselves in them rather than seeing humans in this movie, right? So I think to your point, humanizing these characters, what the voice acting has done here is really has really enhanced it and really add that human touch.
And lastly, I want to talk about the Ham. I think there isn't
The
much we can say.
Ham.
We can't say too much about his character, but
No.
I'll say he's very much admired as like a celebrity in this movie. And Jon Hamm was
Hamming it up.
he was hamming it up. I think he had a blast with this role, and you can tell. And I remember, I think halfway through the movie, you and I just turned to each other and just went, "Jon Hamm," and we both instantly just I think started to enjoy the movie that much more after
Yeah,
that.
I like Ham. Don't get me wrong.
You're
I'm
not a ham
liking.
head?
No, I'm not a ham
That's
head.
what we call
I'm liking
ourselves.
more of his comedic stuff. I
Sure.
definitely am liking more of that push that he's doing towards that comedic stuff to kind of almost break because he has such a clean cut guy vibe to him that when you see these sort of over exaggerated, like his skip the dishes ads were phenomenal.
Yeah.
Like that whole ad campaign was so great, and
Yeah.
he really leaned into it. And I think that even when he's in Bridesmaids, he's done a whole bunch of other things that are very comedic. I think that's where he shines
Mhm.
because it's really disarming to see someone as the madman, suddenly become this hilarious, jokester. And I think he does it really, really well. It looks good on him outside of everyone else just thinking he looks good, right?
For sure.
So
For sure.
I think it's
And he,
great.
he definitely looks good in this movie. Um, now, let's get into the story. Obviously, we're going to keep things completely spoiler free, as we already have been doing. There's so many things that I want to talk about and jump in on, but we cannot. We will not.
Yeah.
But I think this story. There are moments that are going to feel maybe a little bit predictable as you go through, but I did feel like it flowed so well. I think there's a lot of exposition, but it's an origin story, so I can understand why that is. But I also love that this is an origin story that we've not gotten before. This is a new thing. This is a friendship between Optimus and Megatron, and I think that their chemistry was so contagious. You sort of instantly fall in love with these buds, these bros, if you will.
Yeah.
And
These
and I think
bots.
I think I think that that's what works so well with this story, just as sort of the glue that sort of keeps everything together. For all the moments that sort of I would sort of fall out a little bit or be like, I don't know how I felt about that. They'd do a fist bump, they'd do a high five, they'd say a funny line back and forth, and they'd pull me right back in. So I really do think that as far as the story is concerned, friendship is kind of the main element there.
Yeah, friendship and the inevitable divide that it would lead to, right?
Hmm.
Like friends can grow apart, and that's a hard reality. You don't stay friends with people forever,
Yeah.
and things can influence that. And I think that's very much what this is. In my opinion, the story is arguably one of the strongest aspects of this film. I think it,
Hmm.
centering on a character development first and foremost is what really is the success of this story. It takes the narrative back to the beginning. It allows the film to build and contextualize the world of Cybertron. It's laying the groundwork of the eventual conflict that we all know and love between Autobots and Decepticons, but focusing on the early friendship between Optimus or Orion Pax and Megatron D16. The film adds an emotional depth and tragic weight to their relationship. Seeing them as best friends united in this vision for Cybertron, it really hits deep on the level because we know the devastating path and the rival what will happen with their rivalry and where it will lead. I think the exploration of the initial bond gives insight to motivations, obviously, and making their inevitable fallout and the destruction, what will lead to be the destruction of Cybertron, all the more heartbreaking. The film's character first approach helps humanize, as we were talking about, these larger than life figures, and it really does make their legendary feud feel more personal and tragic. So I think, just this one movie really establishing that relationship helps to inform so much of what we already know about the future of what would of the events that would happen. And I will say, like, I don't think this is a spoiler, but I will say, like, there is a lot of exposition. There's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff. If you are a fan of the live action, I will say some of that stuff might find its way into this movie. That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
It's very, there's layers to it, and that's the other thing I really appreciate is that, you see a lot of the names that were on the names of those live action movies. It feels like some of those elements, or narrative elements, have been plucked from different parts of this lengthy live action series to help kind of add to this origin story. So I don't know if we're saying that these animated characters are going to be the inevitable live action characters. I really hope not.
I
I
hope not.
really hope that this is the beginning of a
Yeah.
whole new trajectory for Transformers, because I think it's safe to say that animation lends itself to being um, far more of a success than anything live action has brought them.
Absolutely. I mean, the movie is definitely a journey. I think there are, I mentioned earlier, like they would get to moments where you sort of get to those best friend moments and fist bumping moments, and I think there are sort of elements that at times can feel a bit synthetic, just in terms of some of the dialogue. I think uh, it was maybe the only area that really threw me off was, and I'm saying this as a 34-year-old, excuse me, man watching this movie. But it just felt like it could have trusted younger audience members maybe a little bit more. And this is a line in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler, but in the trailer we hear Alita say, "We can transform now." And to me, there were so many other indications, whether it be the swelling music or literally the 5 lines of dialogue prior, that gave a good enough explanation of that. And I don't think that those kind of lines are fully necessary in a modern
Sure.
animated film, no matter who your intended audience is. I mean, listen, if we're talking about a Bluey movie, sure, do you have lines like that? I don't care. But I mean, Bluey's probably much smarter than that anyways. But you know what I mean? Like a Paw Patrol kind of thing, right? Like, I'm sure that's totally fine. I don't think there's issues there because it's a much younger audience. But I just don't know if it was necessary for some of the filler dialogue that we get in this movie, to just sort of fill in quiet moments. Because again, to your point, the smart use of using B to just sort of continuously talk to show the progression of time is such a smart way to do some of the things that I felt were a little bit of a cop out in some moments in the dialogue when it came to, let's go here, we're going over here next, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think, again, we're not, I'm not dubbing this as a kids movie. It's obviously intended for all ages,
Yeah,
which is the way I would position it, because Transformers is much like a lot of the pop culture stuff that we know and love. It spans decades. It spans different age groups, and, like, I have nephews who love Transformers, right?
hmm,
Will they like this film? Probably, because
absolutely.
it's more inviting than me trying to show them a live action and them getting scared.
Sure, yeah.
So you know what I mean? So, like, there's this opportunity, but the thing that we're talking about here, obviously, and that you're mentioning, is that balance for both, for that all ages audience, where it is a matter of trusting your audience, right? And trusting kids. I think Dan Hernandez from Lego Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy, when I did the interview with him, which is out now on youtube.com/geekcentric and on podcast feeds, he talked about that, and he talked about this idea of not writing for kids, but writing in a way that allows kids to kind of understand, and trusting them to understand. And it's not necessarily, they might not get it, but they might get it later. I know for myself, I watched things like The Simpsons growing up, which
Yeah.
probably wasn't the best. I didn't understand all the jokes until I was much older. So a lot of the times when we think that things might go over our head or not, especially with kids nowadays, with how much they are exposed to from an internet standpoint, they're a lot smarter than we would like, than we would think. So, again, to the point of what you're making, maybe we trust the kids understand some of the narrative elements and we leave out some of that filler. I think that's a smart assessment, and I think I'd like to see more movies lean away from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's just so many other, it's just one of those things. It's like when so many elements work so well, it's like even the little missteps that they make are a little more
Yeah.
noticeable, right? And so
Sure.
but I think, to your point, for families, for new generations of Transformers fans, this movie is excellent. So let's get to our final thoughts and overall scale rating on a scale of 1 to 5 delicious cubes of energon. There's a moment where they like force feed someone energon in this movie, and I was like,
Yeah.
I could go for some energon right now.
Yeah, like coffee cubes or some shit like
Yeah.
that. Right. Yeah, like I've been saying, Transformers 1 excels in ways that live action films never quite managed, with its character first approach, laying the foundation for deeper emotional connections, and in my opinion, rich storytelling. The animation is top tier, as we were talking, creating a world that feels both cold and mechanical, yet organically alive. And performances from Chris Hemsworth, Brian Tyree Henry, they breathe new life into the iconic characters we know and love. Key's chatty Bumblebee brings an unexpected humor, and I think, again, Scarlett Johansson, while not overly utilized, I think she serves a crucial part as being the mature anchor that helps guide the other characters, more importantly Optimus, in this journey. I think the film shines by focusing on the early friendship between Optimus and Megatron, building a powerful narrative around their bond, and then the inevitable fallout, with tragic undertones that leave room for future exploration in this timeline. Like, we do not need to rush to get to a point where they get to Earth. Let's explore more of this timeline. I think that there's opportunity here to do that and stay in this animation world. The potential for stories in this era are like tantalizing in some ways, and there's just no need to rush to that destruction of Cybertron. um as you were discussing there, as before we got into the sort of final score, there are a few narrative and editing choices that could have been tightened, and things that, I again, maybe trusting the audience a little bit more, a little less filler dialogue. But in my mind, that doesn't really diminish this movie all that much. I'm really surprised by how much I love this movie, and I think it really has a lot to do with the way I've been kind of looking at stories, and that's character first, spectacle second, sort of mentality. And I feel like this film achieves all of that, and it's putting its characters first. It allows the spectacle to follow naturally, and for that reason, I am giving it a 4.5 out of 5 cubes of Cybertron.
Cubes of energon.
Oh, damn.
You
Cubes
get
of
your
energon, whatever.
You get it from Cybertron.
Sure.
Transformers fans are gonna love this movie. Animation fans are gonna love this movie, and I think there's even some love for collectors in this movie that we both popped off for, where we both sort of collectively noticed a moment between two characters sharing their love of, let's just say, a collectible. I won't spoil it, but it's really cool. And I think it moves at a really good click. I think it gives non-Transformers fans enough to go off of as an origin story, but then it's also this original story, and like you were saying, it has so much depth, and I can't wait to see these characters in another animated big screen adventure. I think older fans like us, I think families, are gonna dig it. I think it proves that we don't need humans, like you're saying. Like, we don't need humans. We don't need giant live action versions of these characters to get a fantastic Transformers adventure on the big screen. Gorgeous, nostalgia inducing animation, fantastic action, comedy, great cast. It's one of my favorite movies of the year, and it's up there with Inside Out 2 as one of my favorite animated movies of the year, which is crazy because, like, that's a Pixar movie. Like that's a really, really good Pixar movie. And this is getting up there with it. And I it's definitely in my top 3 Transformers movies ever made. So for that reason, I'm going to give this a very, very solid 4.5 out of 5. Delicious cubes of Energon. But that is it for our review of Transformers 1. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to subscribe to us wherever you like to listen to podcasts, if you haven't already. And if you want to write into the show with your thoughts on this movie or any of the shows or movies we cover, well, let me just transform into Justin so I can let you know how you can reach us.
Well, they can reach us at wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. That's wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. Or they can reach out to us on X at GeekcentricYT or on Instagram at wearegeekcentric.
Okay, keep in mind we also have a ton of other great episodes covering the latest in movies, TV shows, and more, including our recent spoiler-free reviews for Marvel Television's Agatha All Along, HBO's The Penguin, Only Murders in the Building Season 4, Episodes 1 to 7, Borderlands, and Batman the Caped Crusader, as well as our Marvel Hall H SDCC recap conversation, our experience at D23, the Ultimate Fan Event, and our experience at Fan Expo Canada 2024. We also have a ton of interviews out now, like our interviews with Benji Samit and Dan Hernandez, like you mentioned, Justin. They are the writers and showrunners for Lego Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy. And we also talked to Bobby Moynihan, who plays Jedi Bob in that series. We geek out over all things Star Wars and Lego with them. And we even discussed with Bobby who he would cast in a Star Wars Saturday Night Live. And we also have our most recent interviews out with the cast and showrunner for Marvel Television's Agatha All Along. We spoke with Agatha herself, Catherine Hahn, and Joe Locke, who plays Teen in the series, as well as showrunner, director, and executive producer Jack Schaefer. We chatted about the music in the series, how it stays fresh while maintaining the tone of WandaVision, and we asked Catherine and Joe who they'd want their characters to team up with for a Marvel Broadway musical. So you got to catch those interviews either here on your podcast service of choice or over on YouTube at youtube.com/geekcentric. Be sure to subscribe in case, if you haven't already. What are you doing? Go subscribe. We got a ton of great stuff coming out as we make our way through the wonderful, cozy geek fall, the spooky geek fall. And our coverage for Agatha All Along doesn't stop there. We are going to cover the series in our Watch Club format with full witchy spoilers and theories galore after the 4th episode comes out on October 2nd. So look forward to that, and then we'll kind of go weekly until the 2-part finale on October 30th. We'll have something sort of, maybe our Watch Club finale will be out shortly after Halloween at the beginning of November. Justin, my Autobot friend. Would you be an Autobot or a Decepticon?
I'll let fate decide that. I don't know. I'd probably be an Autobot. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be a Maximal.
Yeah. Maybe I you know what? I'm an Autobot that turns to a Decepticon.
Whoa.
Right? Or,
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this transformative review. And as we say, love ya.
Peace.